Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vandana Dialani, and I'm going to be speaking on axillary lymph nodes. I have no disclosures. So honestly, when I got this topic, this was my reaction. And because this is a very controversial and confusing topic. So why is there so much confusion regarding this topic? So the surgical management of the axilla is continuously evolving, and there are no set guidelines. Generally, people say less is more, and that's the theme. However, as you know, communication is really the key between the multidisciplinary teams, between the radiologists, surgeons, and the oncologists. So let's see, in the next hour or so, if we can go over everything that we know about the axilla and come to peace with this topic. So the objectives are, in the next about 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to go over the basics, just the axillary anatomy and imaging, and then we'll kick in and discuss the Z11 and the Z107 trials, the controversies related to this trial, and then we'll go ahead and discuss the role of percutaneous interventions, whether to do a FNA, whether to do a biopsy, and all those specifics. So going back to the basics, sorry, I don't know why this is forwarding. Okay. So just going back to the basics, we're just going to discuss basics for the next 10 to 15 minutes, so you can kick back, relax, and let's review all of the basics that we know. So we know that the axilla contains the axillary artery, the vein, the brachial plexus, and the lymph nodes, which is the lymph nodes that we are really interested in. The most important thing is that this is a shared space. And that's what we need to remember, especially when we're doing percutaneous interventions. So let's look at the lymph node a little bit closely. This is the lymph node that we look at every day. So the lymph flows from the afferent lymphatics, goes through the capsular sinusoids, through the cortical sinusoids, and then through the medullary sinusoids, and then exits out through the efferent lymphatics through the hilar mediastinum. The cortex, which has all these lymphoid follicles, is basically anechoic because lymph is fluid and it's anechoic. Whereas the medulla, which has the medullary cords and the sinuses, is created by the interfaces, and that creates the hyperechogenicity that we see within the hilum of the lymph nodes. The hilum, which is like a mid-level gray, is created by the fat that is insinuating within the mediastinum and the vessels. So there are changes that happen to these lymph nodes as we get older. So as patients get older, and with repeated infections, fat insinuates within the hilum, and the medulla, as you see here with the arrow, gets compressed to a thin echogenic line. And the gray hilum here is basically the fat insinuating because of the repeated infections. And that usually causes increase in size of the lymph nodes. And that's one reason why size is not a great indicator of involvement or malignancy. Now, when patients are young, there is not that much inflammation or infection, and so the medulla remains hyperechoic. What we see on ultrasound is really the interfaces and not the actual fat. What we see, I'm not sure why this is just auto-forwarding. Anyway, so what we see on the ultrasound is really the interfaces and not the actual fat. But when we see we can actually see the fat on mammography pretty well. So a normal axillary lymph node, when the cortex is about 3 millimeters, that's considered normal. And generally, you have a normal bidirectional flow that we see at the hilum in a normal axillary lymph node. So let's go over some characteristics of abnormal axillary lymph nodes. The tumor cells, when they move from the afferent vessels, they can actually get deposited in the subcortical region, and we can get eccentric cortical thickening, as seen here. and that can recruit neovascularity. And so that's the appearance that we see with eccentric cortical thickening. The tumor cells can get deposited at the corticomedullary junction, and we get the appearance of this focal cortical thickening. The tumor cells can compress the medulla and cause partial effacement of the lymph node, as seen over here. And the tumor cells can sometimes just deposit under the subcapsular level and cause subcapsular appearance. So this here, as we see, the subcapsular extension of the tumor cells. And you can see these tumor cells here in the subcapsular region. So the other thing you can get is a combination of all of these. And then if the tumor extends beyond the capsule and there is extracapsular extension, the morphology of the lymph node changes completely. The morphology of the lymph node changes completely, and you get an appearance of distorted morphology and sometimes even a spiculated mass within the axilla. The other appearance that we can see is calcifications within lymph nodes. And when you see these calcifications within lymph nodes, it's important to identify these calcifications and match them up with the calcifications that we see within the tumor. And if these match up, then that's suspicious. As you see here, these calcifications are microcalcifications, and you can see that it has recruited neovascularity. This is a schematic which exactly shows what we went through. So initially, the tumor cells will deposit within the cortex will thicken, and then it distorts the hilum, and there is effacement of the hilum, initially partial and sometimes complete effacement of the hilum. And then there can be extracapsular extension. Now, when we are doing biopsies of these or FNAs of these lymph nodes, we need to know which features are specific and which features are really non-specific when we look at these lymph nodes. So if you have complete or partial effacement of a fatty hilum, or if you have a complete or partial replacement of these lymph nodes with ill-defined mass and irregularity, which means there is extracapsular extension, that is a very highly specific feature of involvement with malignancy. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is just auto-forwarding. That's fine. When you have diffuse cortical thickening, or if you have a focal cortical bulge, those features are pretty non-specific. So as breast imagers, what do we offer in terms of evaluation of the axilla? Typically, we do ultrasound evaluation of the axilla. We can do an FNA or biopsy of these abnormal lymph nodes, and then we can place a clip within these biopsied lymph nodes. And once we place the clip, we can also localize these lymph nodes, and we can do this with either ultrasound, CT, or MRI. We also identify these abnormal lymph nodes on a breast MRI and on a PET scan. So let's go over ultrasound evaluation of the axilla. This is currently the most reliable method. It is moderately sensitive but highly specific for metastases. And as we discussed, size is really a very poor diagnostic indicator of predicting malignancy. So we have to rely on morphological features that we went over. So when we do ultrasound evaluation of the axilla, make sure the patient is positioned correctly. The arm is above the head. You put a wedge and flatten the axilla, and then do a good sweep from the medial to the lateral aspect of the axilla. Identify first identify the vessels, and also identify the pectoralis major and minor muscles. And then you want to identify the vessels in relationship with the identify the lymph nodes in relationship with the vessels and the muscles. And similarly, do a sweep from inferior to the superior, going up to the humeral head. And doing the same thing, identify the pectoralis muscle, identify the artery and the vein, and then the lymph nodes in relationship to these. Cross-sectional imaging shows these lymph nodes very well. So the level 1 lymph nodes are the lymph nodes that are lateral and inferior to the pectoralis minor muscle. So these are the level 1 lymph nodes. The level 2 lymph nodes, the level 2 lymph nodes are the ones which are under the pectoralis minor muscle. And then sometimes you will have lymph nodes between the pectoralis major and minor muscle, and that's the interpectoral or the Rotter's node. The level 3 lymph nodes are the ones which are medial to the medial border of the pectoralis minor muscle. The other thing we can see on cross-sectional imaging is the internal mammary lymph nodes. And internal mammary lymph nodes will also change a little bit with age. But anytime you see an internal mammary lymph node which is about 5 to 6 millimeters, that's generally considered abnormal. So we'll give the number and the characteristics of these lymph nodes on an MRI report. And if the team is really suspicious, they'll get probably a PET scan before they treat these. If the axillary lymph nodes are involved along with the internal mammary lymph nodes, then it upstages to stage 3 disease. So it's important to identify these internal mammary lymph nodes because if there is just internal mammary lymph nodes without axillary metastases, that's N2 disease. And it's usually seen in medial lesions or deeper lesions. But typically, internal mammary lymph node metastases will be seen along with axillary metastases, which is stage 3 disease. There is definitely no survival benefit to surgical treatment of internal mammary metastases. However, it does have prognostic significance. And we know that long-term survival is reduced if there is internal mammary metastases. And then the radiation field can be altered to include these once we identify them. So here's an example of a patient who has a breast mass higher up in the upper outer quadrant. And the patient also had a mass in the breast, which was pretty circumscribed with irregular margins. We took her to ultrasound, and you see this breast mass, and the circumscribed mass corresponds here to a hypoechoic circumscribed lesion with a central vascularity. We biopsied both of these masses, and as you can see, clips placed within both these masses. So this dominant breast mass was invasive ductal carcinoma, and this was an intramammary lymph node which was involved. So moving along to intramammary lymph nodes. These are lymph nodes which reside in the breast, and they are designated as axillary lymph nodes for staging purposes. So a positive intramammary lymph node upstages from N1 to stage 2 disease. So it does have prognostic value. But the management generally is still based on the axillary lymph node status. So typically, if the axillary lymph nodes are not involved, at least in an institution, the intramammary lymph node will be excised along with the breast mass if breast conservation is contemplated. So based on the axillary involvement and the internal mammary lymph node involvement, the staging changes. And we just had a lecture on this, and the same slide was projected beautifully, so I'm going to skip over. The other thing, once we identify these lymph nodes, we can biopsy them, and we can either do an FNA or we can do a core biopsy of these abnormal lymph nodes. So FNA is very simple to perform, as we all know. We generally perform them with a 25 or a 26 gauge needle. The sensitivity really varies from 25 to 87%, and there is a very high false negative rate. And you also need a specialized cytopathologist on site. So as against this, the sensitivity with the ultrasound-guided core needle biopsy is up to 90 to 94%, and so generally that's the technique of choice. But beware, just make sure you use either an open trough technique or a no-throw needle, because that has a lower incidence of hematoma. And the other thing I already mentioned is that sampling should only be done when there are high-yield sonographic features. Sentinel lymph node biopsy is always performed, even if the axillary lymph node biopsy is negative. When you're doing ultrasound-guided core biopsies, again, positioning is important. Make sure the patient is positioned well, the axilla is flattened with a wedge. Go ahead from the inferolateral to the superior-medial approach. That's the best. Don't be shy to use a scalpel if you want. You want to have more control when you're doing lymph node biopsies. You use a local anesthetic to actually probe the area. So when you're injecting local anesthetic and if the patient jumps, you know you may be probably hitting a nerve, and so you can change your trajectory. Also remember the shared space that we spoke about. So there are important structures over there, the axillary artery and the vessels. And so do a good pre-procedure scanning and use color Doppler. Things could go south sometimes. So here's an example. There's a 64-year-old patient who had cancer in 2015, and patient presented with a FDG-AVID axillary lymphadenopathy. We did an ultrasound, and we identified this abnormal axillary lymph node and decided to do a biopsy on this one. And as you can see, this is the needle here pre-biopsy, and the needle here after the biopsy was taken. And a throw needle was used over here. This patient returned back in 2 hours with an expanding hematoma. And we had to send the patient to the ER after the breast surgeon was involved. And as you can see here, there was extravasation of contrast, and the patient had a pseudoaneurysm. Granted, this doesn't happen always. This is one case that I've seen in 15 years, but just be careful. All right, so now that we've discussed the basics, I think we can dive in a little bit into the trials. So let's go ahead and discuss the Z11 and the Z1071 trials. Okay. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here. Okay. All right, so moving ahead. Oh, maybe not. Okay, so life was really simple before the Z11 trial came through. Anytime we had a suspicious breast mass, we would scan the axilla. If there was an abnormal lymph node, we would either do an FNA or core biopsy. If it was positive, the patient went for axillary lymph node dissection. And if we didn't do that, then there was a two-step procedure that we followed. The patient went ahead and got a sentinel lymph node biopsy. If that was positive, then there was a second stage where there was a completion done and an axillary lymph node dissection was done. The surgeons were very happy. The team was very happy that we scanned the axilla, right? Then came the revolutionary Z11 trial. And the Z11 trial basically had it was designed on this hypothesis that if the tumor is less than 5 centimeters, and if the sentinel lymph node showed only positive, there were 2 positive lymph nodes, then maybe the patient doesn't need an axillary lymph node dissection, and maybe we can avoid all of this morbidity involved with axillary lymph node dissection. So they included patients who were less than 5 centimeters, the tumor size was less than 5 centimeters, and the sentinel lymph node was positive only in about 2 lymph nodes. They were divided into 2 arms. One arm was patients went to axillary lymph node dissection. The second arm did not have any further intervention. There were some exclusions: the patients with neoadjuvant chemotherapy, patients who had palpable lymph nodes, patients having mastectomy or partial breast radiation, or patients with more than 3 involved nodes were excluded from this trial. The results were phenomenal. What's interesting is that about 27% of the axillary lymph node patients had additional positive non-sentinel lymph nodes. And so the presumption is that the patients who did not get an axillary lymph node dissection probably also had positive sentinel lymph nodes. But when you looked at the survival benefits, there was overall, as well as disease-free survival, there was really no difference at 5 years. And the locoregional recurrence rates were also not that different, as you see over here. The complications were definitely much less in the sentinel lymph node group compared to the axillary lymph node dissection group. and there was much less lymphedema associated with sentinel lymph node biopsies. There were a lot of controversies associated with the Z11 trial, however. Only 47% accrual rate of the targeted 1,900 patients. It was closed early. Many large institutions did not participate in the trial, and the Z11 included patients with low axillary burden was a criticism. Also, that the radiation field treated the low axillary lymph nodes. After the Z11 trial came out, there was a real shift in the approach to axillary staging. People said, don't look, don't tell. We were really, really worried that if we found a positive axillary lymph node, we were sending the patient to axillary lymph node dissection, and so we were really doing harm to the patient. The literature after the post-Z11 trial has been very confusing. There have been multiple papers which suggested that preoperative axillary ultrasound is useful in staging. Also saying that ultrasound is correlated with tumor burden and the number of involved nodes. And so this is still a controversial topic. And the Z11 did not include patients, did not really address the pre-op ultrasound. So what should we do? It's still the question. In our institution, we actually got together with the team, the surgeons, oncologists, radiologists. And at that point in time, everybody was just about grappling with the fact of the Z11 and didn't know how to address it. And so it was chaotic, and we did not reach any consensus. And we eventually said, OK, we're not going to scan the axilla at all. However, fast forward, we have the results of the Z11 trial 10 years later. And again, phenomenal results. The disease-free survival as well as the overall survival numbers are pretty similar as compared to the axillary lymph node dissection. So it shows that Z11 is here to stay, and we have to work with it. So I want to share some literature that happened in and about when the 10-year trial came out. So this is a paper from Annals of Surgical Oncology, 2017. It says positive ultrasound-guided lymph node biopsy in breast cancer may not mandate axillary lymph node dissection. So the premise of this paper was that Z11 did not include patients with pre-op ultrasound. So they retrospectively studied, granted this is a smaller number, 129 patients from 2 institutions. Patients did not have any palpable lymph nodes. They had a positive biopsy, and there was at least 1 confirmed node which had axillary metastases. They had 67 N1 and 62 N2, N3 disease. And they concluded that if the tumor size was less than 2 centimeters and there was only 1 abnormal lymph node on axillary ultrasound, patients may undergo attempt to sentinel lymph node biopsy. This is a larger study from Sloan, Monica Morrow's groups from a Journal of American College of Surgery from 2016. And this said, is preoperative axillary ultrasound, or not X-ray ultrasound, but X-ray imaging beneficial in identifying clinically node-negative patients requiring axillary lymph node dissection. They included T1 and T2 node-negative patients, but they treated all patients based on the Z11 criteria, independent of the axillary imaging findings. A much larger study, about 3,000 patients were included in this study, and of those 3,200, 425 met the Z11 criteria and had nodal metastases on sentinel lymph node biopsy. They found that about a quarter of the patients had an abnormal lymph node, either on ultrasound or MRI. And out of those, about 68 to 70% patients did not need axillary lymph node dissection. So they concluded that in clinically node-negative patients with abnormal axillary imaging, almost 3/4 of the patients did not meet the criteria for axillary lymph node dissection and could be spared for the surgical morbidity of an axillary lymph node dissection. This is another paper from Radiology in 2018, which says preoperative axillary ultrasound in early-stage breast cancer has the potential to prevent unnecessary axillary lymph node dissection. Again, 1,800 patients, T1, T2 disease, so fitting the Z11 criteria. The patients had sentinel lymph node biopsy with or without axillary lymph node dissection. All these patients had preoperative axillary ultrasound, and the results were compared to status of non-central lymph node metastases. So what they found was 22% patients had positive axillary ultrasound, and a quarter of these had non-central lymph node metastases. They also found that patients who had non-central lymph node metastases were younger, they had a higher stage, and had lymphovascular invasion. So they concluded that preoperative axillary ultrasound can help select minimal risk of non-central lymph node metastases for whom axillary lymph node can be omitted. So basically, the recent literature says that if you have clinically node-negative patients, even with abnormal axillary imaging, these patients can undergo central lymph node biopsy, and they can be spared axillary lymph node dissection and further surgical morbidity. Okay, so sigh of relief. This is good. So what should the radiologist do? Are we still causing harm by scanning the axilla and identifying these abnormal axillary lymph nodes? Should we scan the axilla or not? So I want to pose this question to the audience. What approach do you take for clinically T1, T2 disease? Because this is all the information that we have when we see the patient. We only know that the tumor is less than 5 centimeters. So there are 4 options over here. So how many of you do not scan the axilla and wait for the care team's decision? Okay, so just a few. So maybe this is the best practice if you do not have any communication with the care team, and you're not sure if you found a positive lymph node that the patient would undergo axillary lymph node dissection. So some practices where you have absolutely zero communication, I think this is what you should follow. How many of you scan the axilla, document the number and characteristics of abnormal lymph nodes, and then stop there? Quite a few. Okay. So this might be good for practices who knows how the care team treats the patient, and this information probably helps them decide with the management. And how many of you scan the axilla, document the number of nodes, find the abnormal node, do a biopsy, and clip the nodes? Oh, I see a lot of hands. That's great. Okay. So I think this is, you can go this route only and only if this is what your surgeons want and this is what your oncologists want, and they are the driving force for this. All right, and I don't think this discussion is complete without talking about the Z1071 trial. I'm going to need a little bit of help here. Can we advance the slide? Okay. So neoadjuvant chemotherapy. The use of neoadjuvant chemotherapy has really increased over recent years, and it's becoming really the primary recommendation in patients with high-risk biological features, especially like the triple-negative and the HER2-positive breast cancers. And there's significant advance in surgical management of patients treated with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. There's also a potential to allow less invasive surgical intervention in the axilla for patients who have an excellent response to neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So the the Z1071 trial was designed to determine if the false negative rate for sentinel lymph node surgery following chemotherapy in patients who initially presented with biopsy-proven node-positive breast cancer. The premise was that if the false negative rate was 10% or lower, which is similar to a node-negative patient, we could possibly avoid axillary lymph node dissection in these patients. So this was a prospective multi-institutional trial. About 136 institutions participated in the trial. 756 patients were included, and they had clinically node-positive disease, which was proven by percutaneous needle biopsy. 649 underwent chemotherapy, and both sentinel lymph node and axillary lymph node dissection. And 525 of those patients had 2 or more sentinel lymph nodes removed. The results. So the false negative rate was 12.6%. It was not quite the 10%. It was a little bit below the threshold that they expected. So there was a subset analysis of this main trial which was done. And what they found was that there were about 141 patients who had a confirmed clip placed in the axillary lymph node and had N1 disease and had 2 or more lymph nodes, sentinel lymph nodes resected. And of these patients, 107 with clip placements were excised, and the false negative rate was 6.8% in these patients. So the conclusion was that clip placement at the diagnosis of node-positive disease with removal of the clip node during sentinel lymph node surgery reduces false negative rate. And the authors suggested that clip should be placed in a node when conducting the clip should be placed within the node when you're doing a biopsy, and that should be excised at the time of sentinel lymph node surgery. And based on this Z1071 trial, there were many other studies which came forward. So MD Anderson did a study where they preoperatively localized the clip node at the time of sentinel lymph node, and the false negative rate by this targeted axillary surgery was 2.4%. Netherlands Cancer Institute also did a study where they placed a radioactive seed prior to chemotherapy and resected the seeds at the time of surgery, and the false negative rate was 7%. And they did not do a sentinel lymph node biopsy. They only resected this lymph node which had the radioactive seed. Then there was the European Sentinel study where node-positive patients on clinical exam and a negative axilla at the completion of neoadjuvant chemotherapy, when they resected more than one sentinel lymph node, the false negative rate was 9.6%. Otherwise, their false negative rate was 14.2%. And this is totally hot off the press. These are the recommended standards for axillary management in clinical trials of neoadjuvant chemotherapy patients. So what they suggest is that we should do an axillary ultrasound in clinically node-negative as well as node-positive patients. They strongly recommend placement of a clip in a positive lymph node. They recommend using a dual tracer and removal of the clip node. So take-home points. Before neoadjuvant chemotherapy, both clinically node-negative as well as node-positive patients should get an axillary ultrasound. If the axillary ultrasound is positive, do an FNA or core, and then put a clip within the biopsied node, and with the resection of the clip node. So scan the axilla. If abnormal, FNA or core biopsy the lymph node, and then clip the biopsied node. Okay. I apologize. I'm not sure why this is coming up like this, but basically this says patients starting neoadjuvant chemotherapy, we know what we need to do. We biopsy the breast mass, we clip the breast mass, and then scan the axilla. We find the number and characteristics of abnormal lymph nodes. We FNA the most abnormal lymph node, put a clip within that lymph node, and then we should know how to localize that biopsied node prior to sentinel lymph node biopsy. Okay, so we know how to treat patients who are going to get neoadjuvant chemotherapy. But again, the challenge is when we see these patients, all we know is that there is a Birad's 5 mass, and we don't have any more information. So if you see a mass which is more than 5 centimeters, or we have the information that the patient has a palpable lymph node, and they do not fit the Z11 criteria, it's pretty simple. You'll biopsy the breast mass, put a clip in that mass, we'll go ahead and scan the axilla, we'll find the abnormal lymph nodes, and we'll do an FNA or core biopsy of the abnormal lymph nodes. However, again, most times we don't have that information. So how should we address the axilla when we see a Birad's 5 breast mass, not knowing if this patient fits the Z11 criteria? So in our institution, we sent a survey to the surgeons, the radiation oncologists, and the medical oncologists at our hospital. And this is what they wanted us to do. The Birad's 5 mass, they wanted us obviously to biopsy and clip the mass, but they also wanted us to scan the axilla. We identify the number and characteristics of abnormal lymph node. We tell them how many lymph nodes are abnormal. We find the most abnormal lymph node. We do an FNA or core biopsy of that lymph node. We put a clip in the biopsied lymph node, and then there will be times when they'll ask us to localize that positive node. And the rationale being that this helps them decide management. They also believe that sometimes it's difficult to palpate the axilla in some patients with some body habitus. Our surgeons really don't treat the axilla. They only treat the axilla based on the sentinel lymph node results, and they do targeted axillary surgery with removal of the clipped nodes. They also believe that nodal replacement by tumor can sometimes avoid the dye, the blue dye as well as the radiocolloid dye, to penetrate these packed sentinel lymph nodes. And I know this is a controversial topic, but this is valid. And so that's the reason why that communication with your team is so important, because you want to know what rationale they're using to treat their patients. So again, depending on your practice, you may just stop here and not totally look into the axilla and not do any of this. Or you may scan the axilla, you may document the number and characteristics of lymph nodes and stop here and wait for the care team to decide whether the lymph node needs to be biopsied. It really depends on what the team needs. Okay, so you've placed a marker in the lymph node, and now what? We have to make sure that we know how to localize these markers for the surgeons. So there are several ways of localizing axillary lymph nodes. So typically what people will do is put a marker, and then if your surgeon is used to doing an intraoperative ultrasound, then it's easy. You put the marker, the surgeon uses intraoperative ultrasound and excises the clip. There are several limitations though. Make sure that you put the marker that the surgeon can see on intraoperative ultrasound. There are various clips available. We use the Hydromark clip. There are issues with some of these clips, and I'm not going to go into details of this, but just be aware that you want to make sure that marker is used. We can obviously use wires to localize these clips, but again, it's not like putting a wire in the breast. There are potential adjacent structures that we need to remember are there, which we can damage. So typically, the wire localization can only be done under ultrasound. You can put radioactive seeds. The limitation is that it has to be put 5 to 7 days prior to surgery. RFID is becoming much popular now. So you can put a RFID tag, and there is some depth limitation of about 4 to 5 centimeters. We've started putting Savvy Scouts in some of our patients at one institution. So typically, this is how it will go. You find the abnormal lymph node and do an FNA or a core biopsy, put a marker in that abnormal lymph node, and then at the time of wire localization, the patient returns, you identify that marker, put a wire in under ultrasound guidance, and then take a specimen radiograph and confirm that that clip and the node is out. I want to show you one example here. This is a 42-year-old who had a grade 3 tumor and was on neoadjuvant chemotherapy. This was a triple negative. So here's the irregular triple negative mass that we saw in the breast, and the axillary lymph node, as you can see, significant thickening of the cortex. So we did an FNA of this. Sorry, this patient went on neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So here is the pre-neoadjuvant chemotherapy MRI, and you can see this necrotic mass beautifully resolved after the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. There's an adjacent benign mass here. The patient came from preoperative localization. We identified the marker within that abnormal lymph node and did a wire localization. Here you can see the mammogram after the wire placed in, and then that was excised seen on the specimen radiograph. And that's the clip, actually, that was removed. Here's an example of a radar reflector placement. Here's the abnormal lymph node with the clip. We put a Savvy Scout marker here, and this was excised on the specimen radiograph, the clip as well as the marker seen here. Now, localizing the clip node, this is a good paper of early learning experience and challenges. So it may seem that it's pretty simple to localize these, but it can be challenging. And as you can see, the numbers here are very small, 25 image-guided localization. And they could perform about 72% by ultrasound, 8% of those required CT, and they could not localize 20%. So it could get challenging, and sometimes you have to revert to CT to do CT-guided localizations. So here's a paper one of my colleagues, Priscilla Slanners, wrote in 1999 for CT-guided localizations. And this paper was really written when we did not know how to localize MR lesions that were identified. But we can use the same procedure to localize these clip nodes now. So here's a patient, 29-year-old, had triple-negative breast cancer and was on neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And you can see the abnormal lymph node over here with effacement of the hilum and the breast mass, which is irregular hypoechoic here at 12 o'clock. The patient had neoadjuvant chemotherapy and then came to us for wire localization. Here's the clip in the breast, and here you see the clip within the axilla. We scanned. We did not see the mass because it has resolved, and we could identify the clip within the breast. We scanned the axilla and scanned, and we could not identify the clip in the axilla. So had no option but to take the patient to cross-sectional imaging. So we did a CT and identified that clip in the axilla, and so had to put the wire through CT guidance. So here is the CT-guided wire placement, put fiducials, and you can do it, or you can get your body team involved to do wire localizations. And here's the specimen radiograph showing the clip removed. So sometimes you may have to revert to using this technique. So what have we learned? That the surgical management of the axilla has evolved towards being less invasive. We have to use a multidisciplinary approach in understanding what your surgeons, oncologists, and the treatment team is looking for, so we can care for the patients more appropriately. So I want to go over this algorithm, which I can leave you with, and it's really, I don't have a single pathway that you can use, so there's no clear, there are different pathways based on how your team decides to treat the axilla. So if you have a BI-RADS 5 breast mass and the only information you have is that the size of the mass, obviously go ahead, biopsy, and put a clip in the mass, and then don't scan the axilla and wait for the care team to clinically evaluate the axilla. And you want to use this pathway if you're not sure of where the patient is going to get treated, how the surgeons are going to react when you find that abnormal lymph node. So you're better off just stopping there and waiting for them to come back and say, okay, scan the axilla or do this or do that. Depending on your team's preference, and again, if you've had the chance to have that conversation with your team, then do scan the axilla and document the number and characteristics of abnormal lymph nodes, because that will probably help them manage the patient much better upfront rather than waiting for them to send the patient back and get this axilla scanned and then move further. And if you're in an environment where, like ours, where we're lucky enough to know exactly what the surgeon wants, the oncologist wants, then definitely go ahead, find that abnormal lymph node, biopsy the node, put the clip in the node, and then no means of localizing the node. I would recommend that when you see a BI-RADS 4 breast mass, and when you are really not sure whether this is going to be a cancer, just biopsy the mass. Don't bother scanning the axilla, because they still can figure out what we need to do after the path has come back positive, and the team can decide whether the patient needs to come back for the axilla being scanned. So in conclusion, in this era of personalized medicine, we have to work with the multidisciplinary team in the best interest of the patient. And communication, I can't emphasize enough, communication is the key. Z11 and Z1071 are here to stay and for good. And if you biopsy an abnormal lymph node, try to clip the lymph node, and definitely know ways of localizing the clip lymph node. So I hope that we've gained some peace about this subject, and I have not put everybody to sleep. So I'm really happy to take any questions you have, and if you have any questions, you can also email me. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Vandana. Excellent talk. So I have a couple of questions more regarding the clipping and the localizing. So when you clip an axillary lymph node, what clip do you use? Are you specifically using a certain clip that is more echogenic on ultrasound? Do you favor one clip? And the second part to that question is, if you do an FNA and not do a core biopsy, do you just freehand the clip?
Great question, Shyam. So we use the Hydromark clip because our surgeons like to do intraoperative ultrasound and they can identify the Hydromark clip. And so that's what we've been using. However, we've also had some issues with clip migration. And so since the time we started using Savvy Scout, we've been using Savvy Scout to mark, to find this, the abnormal lymph node and the clip, and then put a Savvy Scout in. And again, we could run into the same challenge as I said. If we don't identify that clip, and if the lymph node, especially in neoadjuvant chemotherapy patients, if we don't identify the clip, then we may have to send the patient to get a CT and do a wire localization. And your second question was, if you do an FNA, and I should have included this in my talk, we always clip the lymph node even if we do an FNA. So irrespective of whether you do an FNA or a core biopsy, place a marker in. I think it's important. So we would still clip the lymph node. And yes.
So the second question I have is with the Savvy Scout, I am led to believe that you cannot place the Savvy Scout at the time of biopsy, right? Because you have to place a clip and then the patient returns to have the Savvy Scout placed, correct?
So Savvy Scout now has been FDA approved to be left inside. Having said that, it is expensive and we do not do that. We still have the patient come back and we place the Savvy Scout before the surgery.
Have you ever been in a situation where after neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you cannot find the lymph node and it's very hard to see the clip? So how do you place the Savvy Scout in that time?
In that case, we definitely do a wire localization.
You just do a wire localization?
Yeah.
And is there any particular wire you favor because of the shared space in the axilla?
We've been using the same Hawkins wire that we've been using for the breast and have not had any issues with that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
for the excellent presentation. Have you ever been faced with the situation that a surgeon asks you to re-biopsy a biopsy-proven lymph node that has been marked? Patient undergoes neoadjuvant, and before surgery, they ask you to re-biopsy that same lymph node? And if that is the case, what would be the rationale for that?
We would, so again, the question was that, have you ever been asked to re-biopsy a lymph node after neoadjuvant chemotherapy? And what would be the option? And do you have a situation where the reason as to why the re-biopsy was asked? We usually don't get this request.
So I can think of a case where the breast mass responded, but the lymph node was still abnormal.
And if that is a request, I would probably still go ahead and do a biopsy and do the biopsy the similar way that we did the initial biopsy. Maybe the initial biopsy was done under FNA, or the surgeon's concerned that it was a false negative, but we really have not got any of these requests for re-biopsying a lymph node. But if it is, I would go ahead and do a biopsy again.
Hi, I have a question about how to handle abnormal lymph nodes that come up either in the setting of diagnostic imaging, such as a palpable axillary lymph node in the absence of a suspicious breast mass, or perhaps a callback from screen based on a lymph node that had seemed to enlarge. Because now we're so focused, on lymph nodes in the cancer setting. Sure. Just what is the right pathway to follow? If you scan a lymph node in that situation in the absence of a suspicious breast mass, with a differential diagnosis that could include clinically occult breast cancer versus, multiple other processes that can involve lymph nodes, Is the next step biopsy? Is the next step breast MR to evaluate for occult breast cancer? Do you have a way you handle it or know of any literature to address that topic?
Excellent question. So the question is, how do you handle abnormal lymph nodes not in the setting of a breast cancer? And so we actually did a study at our institution, and we found that if you use the same criteria that you use for patients with breast cancer, and this was before the Z11 trial, the false positive rate is going to be extremely high. And so the recommendation is that you only biopsy the lymph nodes if it fits the high specific criteria of abnormal lymph nodes. So if you really have effaced or completely replaced nodes. And the other important thing we found that is if you do biopsy them, make sure to send them for a lymphoma workup, because a majority of our patients had lymphoma. So those two things are something we should keep in mind. We realized that our false positive rate really reduced when we used a cortical thickness measurement of up to 5 millimeters and not sticking with the 3 millimeters. And then the other thing is, you said patients who come back after screening recall.
Yes.
So again, if you have as I said in the algorithm, if you don't know that the patient has breast cancer, then I would not biopsy the lymph node unless it's like, as I said, completely replaced and it really looks suspicious. I would not biopsy the lymph node. I will document that on my report and then wait for the pathology results and then wait for the care team to decide what we want to do with the lymph node.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Great talk. Thank you. So just to follow up on the CT-guided localization of lymph nodes that you can't see the marker in, why wouldn't you use a radioactive seed or a Savvy Scout for the CT localization rather than a wire?
So the question was, why would you use a radioactive seed or a Savvy Scout? And we do not use a radioactive seed or a Savvy Scout for CT-guided localizations. We do use a wire for CT-guided localizations.
Is it just because you can't be confident that the localization is very precise?
Yes. So we only have limited experience with Savvy Scout, and so I am not so sure how specific we could be with Savvy Scout. We're just learning about it. We've only had experience with placing wires, so I'm probably not aware of what could go wrong with just placing Savvy Scouts. We also sometimes get the body imagers involved when we're doing CT-guided biopsies, and so it's much better to just do a wire placement than using a Savvy Scout.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.